All right, so it's been a few minutes. I've seen some people come in. We're gonna get started. Welcome. Happy New Year. Let me just make sure I got all my screens up and going. There we go. All right, so welcome. We've got some people joining in from Zoom. If you're on Zoom, just make sure you're using the chat box. You can ask questions, participate, answer questions when we get to the practice questions. If you're on Facebook or YouTube, use the comment feature. I can see those too. I've got multiple screens up. So feel free to ask questions at the end of the night since I see some new names. Since just to kind of give you a brief overview of how I kind of do the webinars. At the end of our night, we will wrap up with a link. So I'll give you a link to the notes from tonight so you can have those to refer back to. I like to do it at the end just in case if we want to add anything as we go, you'll have the most up-to-date copy of it. Okay? Any questions before we get going? Oh, you're so welcome. All right. So I've actually condensed everything down into one file tonight. Oh, I see somebody raise their hand. I'm not quite sure. Do you have a question? If you do, pop over to the chat. Yes, this will be recorded. Oh, no, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure you didn't have a question. Hmm. But yes, this should be recorded for the person who just asked about that. All right. So, a few other things since we've got some new people. Welcome. I'm so excited to see some new names. I love that we got some new people joining in with us. So this is part 3. This is an all-in-one. So what that means is that we are going to take a look at the third section of the reading portion for the exam. With it being an all-in-one, what that means is that we are going to do an overview of this entire section. So unfortunately, that does mean that we cannot go into a deep dive on each individual topic. But the great thing is that we do have some resources that you can refer to if you see that as we go through the night. I'll kind of point those out too if I see areas. But we do have in-depth videos or on-demand videos that you can take a look at. And that gives you more of that in-depth look. So tonight with the all-in-one, what we're really looking for is to see what areas, maybe that, I don't like to use the weak word, what areas do we maybe just need to pay a little bit more focus to? So what time we need to spend a little bit more time on. So that's what we're going to really look at tonight. We are going to go over all the topics that this section covers, just not that in-depth dive of it. But we will also do some practices, see where your strengths are, see where we just need to do a little bit more work, and then go from there. Okay? So, any questions? And I will say, let me just say that I am using a new presentation formatting tool tonight. So I'm not even going to lie, there might be some technical glitches. I do apologize in advance if that happens. We will work some magic and we will get through. Don't worry about that. But I just want to let you know that I'm using this brand new software I've never used before to present with. So just bear with me. But regardless, I have a backup just in case. I always come with a plan A, B, and C. So this is part 3, integration of knowledge and ideas. And this will all be built into the slides that I will give you at the end of the evening. So do not ever feel like you have to rush to write anything down. Just know that you will get a copy of everything that I show you on the screen tonight at the end once we've gone through everything. But just a little bit of helpful information for you. So we do have QR codes for pretty much everything. And we do have our January, the rest of this month, and we just posted our February webinars. So this is a great time to join in. We're about to restart our cycle with the all-in-one. So we'll be starting over with part 1 of English and reading in the next week and 2 weeks. So feel free to go to that. If you want to rewatch, so somebody was asking about the recordings. If you want to rewatch webinars, you can go to the QR code here, right here, and that's where you can see the previously recorded ones. If you want to check out our question bank, we've got you covered there. The on-demand videos that I was talking about, here's the QR code for that. So we've got timestamps, notes are included. If you need a more in-depth look at something, we got you covered there too. If you find that you want some tutoring, you want to hang out and do some tutoring, got you there. And brand new, if you are a returning student, then we do have what we call the SurePass and the SurePass Pro. So these are ways that you can actually get products discounted. So check that out and see if that's something that interests you and might fit your needs. All right, so I know that was a whole lot of introduction. Anybody got any questions? You're going to hear me ask that a lot because I don't mind if you have questions. So just know that you can always ask a question. All right. Well, welcome again. Like I said, oh, and by the way, for those who are new, I am Tammy Summerlin. Thank you for joining in. So excited to have you here. What I've done, you see a lot of words on the screen right now, but these are the 4 subsections of part 3 that we are going to talk about tonight. You'll often see, well, not often, but you'll see sometimes that I've got a lot of words that I may not read word for word. I just don't do that with presenting a lot of times, but I do like to give extra information. So that way, because you're going to take this back with you and you're going to look back over this, so you might want to have a little bit more recap of what were we actually talking about. So if you ever see that I'm not talking as much as what's on screen, just know that it's because I'm giving you that in-depth to take home with you, if you will. So 4 subsections that we're going to cover tonight. We're going to look at 3.1. That is pretty much just making predictions, inferences, drawing conclusions from a text. 3.2, we're going to look at compare and contrast themes. 3.3 is analyzing an argument. And 3.4 is analyzing and incorporating data from different sources and different formats. So lots to do tonight. We're going to get rolling and we're going to see what we cover in 2.5 hours. But never fear, I typically cover all of this and we won't end until we do. Okay, so to start with 3.1, making predictions, inferences, and drawing conclusions using evidence from a text. So using the evidence that they supply you. So in this section, what you're looking for is that you want to be able to reference material. So reference whatever material, whether it's a scientific article, a short story, whatever, but you want to be able to reference material from a source to support a prediction. You also, in this section, need to be able to reference material to support interpretations, and then take that material and draw conclusions. So those are the objectives that we're going to work on. Yes, so the numbering, it does parallels to kind of help keep you in line with what you're studying for the test. So what is an inference? Inferences are ideas that are suggested, not stated. So what that means is that these are ideas that you will not see word for word on the paper. It's kind of like that saying of reading between the lines. That's what we're doing when we're looking for inferences. Those are the ideas that are suggested between the lines, not specifically stated word for word. So inferences in reading materials. Logical conclusions are made between the information that is provided to you directly on the page, but to the ideas that are not directly stated by the author. So in order to make that connection between what's on the page and what the author's kind of saying between the lines, is that you're going to want to use context clues, clues that are going to be provided within the text. However, from there, you want to also be able to apply your own knowledge, your own experiences, your own logic, your own common sense, if you will, and approach it from that perspective as well. And we are going to take a look, and one of the most helpful, well, I think it is, and my students have told me this before, but one helpful tip that I always share with my students is when you're reading something and you're trying to determine if it's an inference that you can make from the text, because what they'll do is they'll give you a statement and you're going to try to decide, is this an inference I can make? Well, one tip that I've always given my students is that when you read that statement and you're asking yourself, is this an inference that I can make from the text? Ask it just like that. Is it? Ask it as if it's a yes or no answer. If you get a yes for your answer, what that means is that is, in fact, an inference you can make. If you say no, then you're saying that that's not an inference you can make from the provided material. Okay. So that might sound a little confusing, like, what is this lady talking about with the yes and the no's? Well, we're going to do some practice with that to kind of ease you into it and get you into that thought process. Because like I said, I have had a lot of feedback from students, positive feedback, that have said that this approach really does. So if you struggle with making inferences, give this a try. If it doesn't work for you, we'll try to figure out something else. But this is one that's been very popular with students and been very helpful, is approaching it with a yes or no question, or as a yes or no question. A couple other guidelines and tips for being able to make inferences. Always keep in mind that you should never lose sight of the information that is provided. So they're going to give you information on the paper. It's going to be right there in the material they give you. But the inference just will not be stated word for word. You're going to base your inference on the facts that are being given to you as much as possible. You don't want to go way out in left field. You're going to base it on that information that's being given to you as much as possible. Do not be afraid to use your own background knowledge, experience, and common sense to help you make an inference. But on the flip side, I don't have this written down, but on the flip side, do not let that intimidate you. Okay. I've seen several students who will, they get intimidated by it. They kind of psych themselves out, if you will, and they sit there and say, well, I'm not an expert on this subject matter. I don't really know a lot about this. You know what? Do not let that freak you out. Let that work to your advantage, because guess what? Take it as a positive. We're going into a new year. We are approaching things with a positive perspective. Take that as, okay, yep, I don't know a lot about this topic, whatever it may be. But you know what? It's giving me fresh eyes. You're not overwhelmed and overburdened by too much in-depth knowledge. So give yourself that pep talk, pat yourself on the back, and say, oh dear, it's going to be okay. But don't let that overwhelm you. A third tip is to consider alternatives. Do not, especially when you have those A, B, C, D options, do not always simply just go with that first one and think, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, I'm all done. You want to make sure that you're considering all the facts, you're reviewing all the information, reviewing all of your answer options that you're being given, because it might be just pick one answer, but what if you have one of those select all that applies? Do not be afraid to go through and kind of check your answers, just like if it were a math problem, and see, does A, B, C, and or D work? Because you might have multiple answers. Or it might be that there's only one answer. However, with inferences, you have to also keep in mind, go ahead and ask yourself the yes or no option, but keep in mind that there could be a better option. Okay. So just keep that in mind. All right. So I've done a little bit of talking. Anybody have any questions? Everybody okay? Hanging in there? It's like guessing within guessing. Mm, yes. And that's what scares. Yes, you should be. Yes, it's on YouTube. It is like guessing within guessing, going back to that comment, but um, don't let that make you feel overwhelmed because again, I'm going to show you how to apply this yes and no, and it takes a little bit more of that guessing out of it. Is it like a conclusion? Yes, inferences, drawing a conclusion and drawing it, making an inference pretty much go hand in hand together. And the same application, same tips and tricks, you can apply them. What's the question again to ask ourselves? Ask it as if it's a yes or no. I always like to say yes or no. Those two words, well, three words, yes or no at the beginning, and then I read a statement. And I know it's probably you're like what, and I'm going to show you in just a second. So yeah, I'm going to show you how to apply it. Good questions, good comments. Let me make sure I didn't miss anybody. Yep. All right. Everybody good? You're not feeling too overwhelmed, are you? Okay. All right. So let's take a look. So right here, this is an example of an inference. What I've done is I've written a little passage for you. Okay. Don't judge me. Okay. I write a lot based on my own experiences. Um, um, so I've given you a short passage. Now, based off the information that I've provided within this passage, and remember, what's that saying that's on social media right now? We 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 don't judge. Oh God, I just aged myself. Whatever. You know what I mean? Okay, so we ain't gonna judge. So you're gonna read this passage right here, and then you're gonna come down here, and I have five. I didn't do A, B, C, D. We listen and we don't judge. That's right. We listen, we read, and we don't judge. Okay, gotcha. Okay, got it. So we're gonna read and not judge, and then we're gonna look at these five statements down here. Okay, I numbered them because I wanted you to think of them as statements. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. As you read each of these statements, read it out loud to yourself if you're in a place where you can. Say yes or no, and then read the statement. If you can answer yes to that statement, then that will be an inference. If you answer no, just mark it off your list, and that's not going to be one of your answers. But two of these five statements are inferences that could be drawn or made based off of the passage. The other will not be. Okay? Does that make sense? Everybody with me? All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my timer for 1.5 minutes. If you want to put your answers in the chat box. Oh, yes, we listen and we don't judge. But put those in the chats, the comment sections. I like to see participation because it kind of gives me a little bit of idea of how you're doing. But go ahead. I'm going to start my timer, and then in 1.5 minutes, we'll come back and check our answers, okay? All right, ready? Read and don't judge. Right, everybody feeling good? Anybody need another couple seconds? Okay, take a few more seconds. All right, everybody good? Yep, there's two answers. Two of them will be answers. All right, let's take a look. So you should have selected, why did it not bold it? Oh, heavens to Betsy. Okay, let's see if I can do this. Isn't it so fancy? Maybe I can stamp. Here we go. Maybe I can do this. All right, so number 3. And let's walk through and do the practice together. So when we read the passage, we come down here to the bottom and we read our statements. Number 1. And this is how I do it, okay? Yes or no. The plumber was recommended by a friend. Would you answer that as yes or no? Well, nowhere in this passage did I reference anything about any of my friends. So I would say no. Based off the information provided, you have no way to draw, like to connect that to any of my friends. So that one's going to be a no. So that is not an inference we can make. Number 2, yes or no. The author believes that all plumbers are conmen. Well, you can probably tell how I feel about this particular one, but did I make any sort of reference to them all, like to all plumbers? No. So that's not an inference that we can make. Number 3, yes or no. The plumber may have planned to raise the price all along after the pipes had been removed. Okay. That one we would say yes. And that we can draw that because once he removed the old pipes, it said, I put right here, he approached me wearing a faint smile. Well, that seems pretty mischievous and devious, doesn't it? So there's some sort of flicker of that there was something a little wonky going on. So maybe he did. May have is the key words there. I didn't say for sure, but I said that he may have. So that is an inference that we can make. So I answer yes. So I put a star. That is going to be one of my inferences I can make. Number 4, yes or no. The author's pipes would have lasted for another 5 years. Did I make a reference anywhere in? Oh, I missed the may have. Ah, yeah. See, it's all about the wording. The word choices are really significant in the reading section. But did I make a reference anywhere in there about the condition that the pipes were in? Maybe I just didn't like the color of the pipes. I'm gonna tell you what, it was not that. But just based off what the passage, no, you're right. I did not make a reference anywhere in there to the condition of the pipes. So you don't know why I was replacing them. So, no, that is not an inference I can make. Number 5, yes or no. Originally, the author did not want to spend an extra $1,000. Yes. Can anyone tell me where you saw that inference being made? the third or fourth sentence. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. It turns out the cost will be $4,000 instead. I hadn't realized the extent of the piping he informed me. Crossing my arms, I responded firmly, absolutely not. Exactly, you did it. You said it right there. Absolutely not. So I had put my foot down. Well, not really. I crossed my arms and I was going to put my foot down and say, absolutely not. I'm not going to pay $4,000 because I was originally given the estimate of $3,000. So now this is where you got to pull in that math. You see how math, people always say, well, when am I going to need math? You need it even in the reading section, okay? So I know you hate it, but you got to do it. So what's 4 minus 3? That's $1,000 difference. So initially, I did not want to spend it. I got put into a corner and I had to wash my dirty clothes. So I had to spend it. But originally, I did not want to spend it. And that is given. I didn't come right out and say, no, I don't want to spend $1,000. But I crossed my arms. I said, absolutely not. I did not want to spend it. So I answer yes to this. So number 5 would be an inference that I can draw or make as well. You see how we did that? Does my madness make sense? So now you know. That's how I do it. I always take and put yes or no at the beginning of these answer option statements. All right, let's see if I can close out of that part. All right, everybody good? Anybody have any questions? Okay. Let's see if I can get my arrow back. There we go. All right. So now that you kind of see the workings behind the scene, you see how to apply it. I hope. Oh, no, my little stars. How do I do that? I told y'all, bear with me. I'm so sorry. I don't know what I'm doing here. Nope, I'm just putting stars everywhere now at this point. Let's see if I can erase. Okay, I'll go back in and fix those behind the scenes so that you'll have that for later. But the answers were 3 and 5. Okay, so next page. We got another practice. Now you know how to apply it. So read this passage right here. Now this one is a little tricky, so make sure, this one gets a little bit harder. Make sure you read this one very, very carefully. I'm not even going to lie to you. All honesty, I made this one pretty difficult, and I made it so that there are 5 statements. Some of them look like they could be. I'm giving you fair warning. Some of them look like they could be an inference. However, remember what I said earlier about make sure you read through all of them and you're picking the best ones. So there are 5 statements. Only 2 of them are the best inferences that you can make based off the passage provided. Okay? Try the yes or no. Okay? All right, so I'm going to put 2 minutes on the timer just because that was about what everyone needed last time. And then I'm going to mute myself and we'll come back and check after 2 minutes, okay? All right, ready, steady, go. All right, I see a couple people need some more time, so I'm gonna put about 30 seconds back on the clock, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and take a look. Well, I am so sorry, y'all. I guess my answers, my bolding didn't copy over when I uploaded to this new format. So let's go through and I'm gonna try to figure out. Pretty sure if I draw though, it's gonna, yeah. Okay. Well, never fear. I have a backup. Okay. All right. So let me see if I can get my backup, by the way. Sorry. I told you I felt like there would be technical difficulties tonight. Yep, I do have a backup just in case. Okay. Oh, hold on, I lost my comment box. All right. So for this one, the correct answers were 2 and 3. Now, I would say that a lot of students are inclined to put number 4, but based off the readings, 2 and 3 are the best, most logical inference that you can draw based off the passage. All right, so any questions on those? Yes. All right, so number 2, those who endured physical harm during childhood are more prone to accepting abuse as adults. So we see, oh, hold on. Well, my whole screen just went black. Heavens to Betsy. I hope your screen didn't go black. There we go. I think I got it back. Okay, good. It's just me. I'm so sorry, y'all. I told you I'm still getting used to this. Okay, so 2 and 3. Those who endured physical harm. So where is it? Right here in subsequently, the extent of violence occurs during her upbringing becomes a significant determinant. So, should she have encountered physical aggression from her own parents, she tends to be more predisposed to stay with an abusive partner. So, from that, we can say yes, those who endured physical harm during childhood are more prone to accepting abuse as adults. So, that would be where we get that yes answer from that one. Number 3, women reliant on partners are more prone to remaining in an abusive relationship. Okay, so research indicates that a woman's limited resources lead her to feel increasingly trapped as her options within her current circumstance become restricted. Yep. And I'm so sorry about that spacing. That is off too because of my uploading. Um, with number 4, if you selected that one, like I said, that one is one that people tend to gravitate towards. Having a high level of education does not exempt women from experiencing abuse by their spouses. However, and it's because they see that sentence right here. Lastly, women lacking a high school education or steady employment exhibit a lower inclination to leave such relationships. It's really just because of that wording. Having a high level of education does not exempt. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the keyword lacking. So lacking a high school, so not having that high as oh, excuse me. I've done got myself all in a tizzy and can't talk. So lacking a high school education, so having a higher, so see how the wording flipped there? It sounds like it's almost saying the same thing, but having a higher level of education does not exempt them. Whereas the passage is talking about women lacking the high school education or steady employment. Yeah, I can go to that one. So it's because of the way the wording's flipped there. And then number 5. So yes or no, the greater the extent of abuse a woman faces, the higher the likelihood of her remaining with her husband. So based off the passage, we see that there's a sentence that says right here, see it right there, initially the frequency and severity of the violence plays a pivotal role in whether a woman will end the relationship or seek assistance. However, again, we got to go based off the wording that the statement is making, not the passage per se, but the statement. The greater the extent, the higher the likelihood. But based off what we're seeing in the passage, 2 and 3. Now, 4 and 5 are closely discussed, but not as significantly as 2 and 3 were. Does that make sense? So 4 and 5 are in there because they're discussed, like they're hinted at, but they're not as predominant as 2 and 3 are. So they're almost in there like a trick answer option. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry that it almost got you, but that now you kind of see like that's the kind of wording you got to be on the lookout for. It's that trick wording. And a lot of times I'll tell my students a lot of times when they get something wrong, it's not because they don't know the material. I mean, you know how to make inferences, but it's because their brains just haven't been trained to read these questions this way. And that's what we almost kind of have to work on too. That's almost a skill, foundational skill you have to learn in itself. All right. Well, you're welcome. Ah, that's a great statement. I'm going to read that out loud if you don't mind. Sometimes I tend to go beyond what's written. However, remember that was one of the tips and tricks that I posted that you have to really focus it based off what the passage is saying. Now, the answers aren't going to be written in black and white print or in print, but you have to base it off the information that they are giving you. Or is that a little dancing emoji? Oops, sorry. I didn't mean to click that one. All right. So, I know it seems like we probably just got started, but that is the end of 3.1. That's the first section. Okay. I know we only did 2 practices, but with everything to cover tonight in only such a short amount of time, that's all we really have time for. However, remember, we do have those videos, so you can do some extra practicing skill sets there. Also, QBank, make sure to check that out because we got a lot, and I actually was just rereading through all of them, so I know they're there. There's a lot of questions on how to make those inferences and make those drawing those conclusions, okay? So when you're making a prediction, when you're making an inference, when you're drawing a conclusion, just remember that that's just fancy ways of saying the same thing. You're just making an inference. What can be assumed based off the information provided. Okay. Everybody excited and ready to go on to the next thing? All right. So 3.2, compare and contrast themes that are located in one or more text. Hold on. Hold on a sec. I see what you're saying. Yes, you can to a certain extent, but remember, it's really just based off of when you're going through the answer options, you're looking for, if they specifically say two, they're not going to say two like I did. I was trying to guide you there. But yes, you still can apply, and they certainly are. Yes, that's not what that was intended to mean. But, um, but based off the information provided, those were just the two most supported inferences. All right, so with 3.2 objectives, what we're going to look at in this section is being able to recognize a recurring theme in different works that, look at a common subject matter, being able to differentiate between the difference or in the differences between themes, in themes between works, and then analyze and compare and contrast themes across different diversity. So what that means is different types. So we won't just look at two literary works, we'll look at two different types of works. So to start off this section, what is a theme? So a theme is a central idea. It's an underlining message that the author is telling you through their work. So it's kind of relating with inferences where it's not stated word for word. It's not going to be just right there in front of you and it says, this is the theme of this article you're reading or this short story you're reading. It's going to be built within the content, and you have to use the content, the context clues to pull out what that understood theme is. Themes represent a broad, they are not narrow, they are very broad, abstract concept. So, what is an abstract concept? Just as a little side note. So, remember, that's something abstract, that's something we can't touch, it's not something we can feel. Um, but think of it like when you're trying to identify a noun. A lot of times, students will forget that a noun is a person, a place, a thing, or an idea. You can see a person, you can touch a thing, you can see an animal, but with an idea like love, that's an abstract concept. Okay, you can't physically touch love, but we have an understood idea of what that means. We can't physically touch loyalty, but that's a concept that we can understand, and we all have our somewhat similar understanding of what that means. So that's what we mean by the abstract concept, and that's what we are looking for with a theme, one of those ideas. Okay, so it can be interpreted in different ways, and that's a lot of times why students do not like literature. I've seen that in my um lit courses that students come in and they're very anxious about it because literature can, themes especially, can be open to interpretation in different ways. However, we're going to look at some tips and tricks tonight to kind of help guide you to being able to find a specific theme within a work. Now, just like with inferences that we talked about, themes are not going to always be specifically stated. Again, they're not going to come right out and say, oh, hey, this is what this short story, the takeaway from the short story is. They're not going to do that for you. That would be way too easy, and life's not like that. So instead, what the author is going to do is they're going to reveal that theme to you, the reader, through different elements of a story, which are characters, plots, settings, and then there are other literary elements like figurative language. A lot of time, these themes that you'll be looking for and identifying, they're going to reflect some kind of universal human experience. So, a lost loved one or a lost love, um, wealth and poverty. They're also going to talk about more, they could talk about moral values, good versus evil, right versus wrong. And then another area is societal issues. So, different class levels. Um, I majored in in literature when I was getting my master's, and one of my areas of concentration, excuse me, was that I looked at um, cultural and racial issues that were prevalent during specific time periods in American literature. So societal issues are a big theme that comes across in a lot of works. And a lot of times it may depend on the time period of the piece. So, if it was in the Romantic period of American literature, obviously they're going to focus on more that flowery love, idealistic world. Whereas when you move into the realism, they're starting to look at different social classes, how, you know, um, different races are being treated differently. I like literature as movies. Yeah, a lot of my students do. So I tend to show films based off the readings because it kind of gets them involved a little bit more. But those are things just to keep in mind when trying to think of what is a theme. Okay. So, what do themes do? We've talked a little bit about what they are, but what do they really do? So, the whole point of a theme to a piece of work is that this is going to provide a deeper meaning. It's going to give a little bit more coherence to the narrative, to the story. This is going to allow you, the reader, to connect with a story. Because, again, kind of going back to this slide right here where I mentioned the human experiences, you know, most people unfortunately have lost a loved one. People crave, most people, they want to find a loved one, someone to love. um People, struggle with fitting into different social classes, popularity, things like that. um but what they're essentially going to do is they're going to evoke some sort of emotion, whether it's joy, happiness, sorrow, fear. Fear is another one that you could see. But they also want to provoke thoughts, and they're going to offer you insight into that human condition. Psychologists really tend to love this aspect of literature because it's really kind of diving into the human condition, the human mindset, and things like that. So, as I mentioned, themes are going to be those abstract concepts and a few of the popular ones. Now, this is not all of them by any means. I couldn't list them all in one night if I tried. But some common themes that you might see are love, friendship, justice is a big one. If you've ever read To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, justice is a big one. Redemption, everybody loves an underdog story coming back. Power, loss, freedom, identity is a big one. Gender, privilege, again, good versus evil. Human versus nature. I didn't mention that earlier, but that used to be a very popular one. Specifically when you were looking at Greek works, like their dramas and plays, they really focused a lot on man versus nature. If you've ever read To Build a Fire, that's a popular one. White Fang. Um, a lot of those stories that he wrote about the Klondike and being in the Klondike, the Arctic, that's human versus nature. Now, how do we determine those themes? How do we find them in the works? So, a couple of things you're going to want to do is you're going to want to analyze. So, you want to read the text carefully. Okay, so I know we're under a time constraint and we've got to read within a certain amount of time, but you do want to make sure you're reading carefully, paying attention to different parts of the story, whether it's a long piece or a short piece, if it's a short story or a poem. Look for reoccurring motifs, different symbols. What are some reoccurring things that they talk about? Reoccurring emotions that you're feeling from within that passage. That's going to help you to guide you to what that theme is. Look for that central idea because remember, I told you the theme is that central idea of whatever it is you're reading and whatever it is you're looking at. So you're trying to figure out what the author is trying to say to you. You're looking for those ideas, those concepts, whatever those messages are that are reoccurring. So what you want to do is you want to ask yourself, what's the big picture? What's my big takeaway? Okay. Um, Patterns when reading, looking for patterns, again, looking for those symbols, those motifs. Motifs are a distinct feature. So this is where they occur several times within a passage. They can be objects. So you might see a lot of white objects that represents purity. A lot of images, actions, even certain words or phrases might come up over and over again. Character development. So if you are given a story, a poem with characters in it, look at how they're evolving. Okay. Are they growing as individuals? Are they staying stagnant? And, maybe think about we just wrapped up Christmas if you celebrated Christmas. And if you didn't, happy holidays to whatever you celebrated. But for example, with Christmas, a very popular story that comes around during Christmas time is Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Have you guys ever heard of that? With Ebenezer Scrooge? Come on now, they got a Mickey Mouse version of it on Disney Plus. Jim Carrey did a 3D version of it. Y'all know what I'm talking about, right? Bah humbug. Yeah. Okay. So as a character, would you say that Ebenezer Scrooge stayed stagnant? So he stayed the same, like his character never changed. Who he was as a person never changed. Was he bah humbug all the way through and through? No. He grew as a person. And the whole point of those three ghosts visiting him was to show him during different stages of his life and to warn him that he needed to what? He needed to change. He needed to become a better person. So that's looking at that internal growth. That's the theme of that story is to, you know, not one, it's greed. He was so greedy with his money. He never shared it. He was only about making the bottom dollar. So greed was a theme. Um, Relationships was a theme in that story. He was alone and it showed him that the ghost of Christmas, what was it, past. He saw where he had missed out on a relationship. He had cut himself off and isolated. So we're looking at how the characters, they grow or how the characters are interacting with one another. And then last but certainly not least, these are the ones that get overlooked. Setting and context. Look at how the setting, so where the story is taking place, when the story, not just where, but when the story is taking place. The context of how that plays into the story itself, that can shape the theme of the work. Okay. So, um, that can be a really like when is it taking place? Where is it taking place? Are you giving me an example? The Great Gatsby, yeah, when did that take place? Were you giving me an example or you want me to give you an example? Yep, so the Great Gatsby. Mm, no, the Gatsby wasn't during the 30s. That was during the roaring 20s. Yep. Sorry, I'm reading comments. Yeah. All right, so different ways to determine things. So if you're not familiar with the different parts of a story, make sure that you go back and refresh on that. So make sure you understand narration, setting, characters, dialogue, and plot. Those are all terms that you want to make sure that you understand what they mean and how to find them within a story. So to help you with that, narration, that is just a fancy way of saying telling a story. The act of telling the story is the narration. This is where the narrator, hence the name, is going to present and give you the events that are happening, the actions. Yes, I can go back. That one. So it's going to give you the actions of the story. You good? Okay. I think you're good. If not, I'll circle back around in a second. We're going to go through each of those. But narration, so the actions of the story, the details of the story. And then the exposition in a specific part of that narration is going to provide the background information. So that's going to give you the setting, the characters, the initial situation, kind of like the opening scene, if you will. Now, the setting, like I said, this refers to the time and the place, the location that the story occurs. Think about this, and I bring this up because this was a big focus of my thesis that I wrote. So I looked at passing as it evolved throughout American history. And so I had to look, for example, at the Romantic period. Well, in American literature, that was during, like leading up to, not during, but leading up to the Civil War. Think about culturally, socially, what America was like, and we won't get into any kind of political discussion about it, but just think about what America was like during the pre-Civil War, okay, before the Civil War occurred. Now think about this. We know that the Civil War was fought North versus South, right? Well, think about if you had a story and it was set in the North versus if it was set in the South, okay? Depending on what you're talking about, that's going to significantly impact the whole point of the story, the whole outcome of the story, possibly. And that's where, even with Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, he was, facing, he had to, face that legal action. So, Uncle Tom's Cabin. That was a big thing about, part of the story took place in the South, and there were a few instances where you see glimpses of the North, and that location heavily impacted what was happening within the story. Okay. Um, when you're referring to the physical location, you're talking about a specific city, country, or if it's a fictional world. So, if we got any sci-fi fans, we've got J.R.R. Tolkien, The Hobbit. That takes place in a fictional world. Harry Potter is one of those ones. I don't know how you feel about Harry Potter. Again, we're not going to get into politics of it. But Harry Potter, that is kind of a blended because it starts off in London, which is an actual real place. And then we move into that magical world of Hogwarts and everything. So that's kind of a blend of it. And that plays an impact on the story itself. Also think about, like I said, historical periods. So what time frame is this taking place in? Cultural context, social atmosphere. And the reason why the setting is so very important is because it helps create that backdrop, and that can influence the mood of the story, the atmosphere of the story, the characters' actions. A character is going to behave a lot differently pre-Civil War than they would post-Civil War during the Reconstruction period. Why? Think of this. If you had someone who was a slave pre-Civil War, they didn't have any rights. Now, during the Reconstruction period, you're going, yeah, I'll try to go back. During the Reconstruction period, that's after the Civil War, we're starting to get into rights, but depending on where you're located at in the country, that's also going to be how it's viewed for those rights and things like that. So again, that's where that historical period, cultural context, social atmosphere is so very important. All right, somebody asked if I could go back very quickly. Yes. All right, I got to keep going for our time. Characters. So these are the individuals that the story is going to focus around. They can be human, okay? But they can also be animals. You ever heard of Aesop's fables? Well, one of the most popular ones of Aesop's stories is the tortoise versus the hare. They are both animals. Supernatural beings. There might be a story about a ghost. Um, Inanimate objects. They're personified and given human-like characteristics. Going back, you can kind of tie in supernatural and inanimate objects. Think about Beauty and the Beast. You got a clock that sits there and talks, and that's one of your characters. But these characters, the whole point of a character is to drive that story, because you can't have a story without characters. I guess you can't. Well, no, you can't, because say I was just writing about, you know, a pond, and I'm describing the birds and the fish that live at the pond. Well, guess what? That bird, that fish, they're going to be the characters of your story. Not as exciting as you probably thought it would be, but they are technically characters. But with characters, you do have what we call the protagonist. Make sure you know this terminology, but protagonist, that's the main character. The antagonist is going to be the opposer, the opposite of the main character. Now, that does not necessarily always mean good versus evil, okay? But the antagonist is just whoever's opposite of that main character. Typically, yes, the good guy would be the protagonist, the bad guy would be the antagonist. But what if the bad guy is your main character? What if that's who we're talking about? Think about what's the new movie that just came out? Wicked. My husband's probably in there rolling his eyes if he could hear me right now, because I make everything about Wicked. I love it so much. It's a good moral story, is a great theme to it. But think about it. Any of you watched that movie? Seen it on Broadway? It's life-changing, I'm telling you. Anybody? Come on now, don't let me down. No, you haven't. Oh, it's on streaming. You should check it out. But anyways, yes, it is an amazing song. Okay, well, no spoilers, but spoilers. Okay, so plug your ears if you don't want to hear this. But can anybody tell me who is the main character of Wicked? And for those of you who don't know any context of what I'm talking about, Wicked is the background story of The Wizard of Oz. And the protagonist, the main character of that story, is the witch, who we have associated as being the what? The Wicked Witch of the West. The Wicked Witch of the West, you say? Oh, tigers and lions and bears, oh my. But that's the main character. And they call her the Wicked Witch because she's green and she's different. Oh, the themes. Oh, let me tell you the themes that are in that story. But that's the main character. The antagonist is going to be the opposite, the main character of the story. Now, in Wicked, there's actually a couple different antagonists. No spoilers, I won't tell you. But there are a couple that are opposite. They're not always a good guy, because you'll come to see, no spoilers, you'll come to see that the Wicked Witch was not actually wicked. But again, then you've got supporting characters like Galinda. Let's say her name right, shall we? Galinda. So supporting characters. So those are going to be people that back up the story and keep it going. So in Beauty and the Beast, you got the little clock and you got the little candelabra thing. Candle, yeah, candle, I don't know whatever it is. But anyways, they're all bouncing around their supporting characters. But they're going to have different aspects that help shape that story. So they all have different traits. You're not going to have every single character be the exact same. How boring would that be? But different characters have different traits. They have different motivations. They show different relationships. I'm telling you, even if you don't like a musical, you really ought to go watch Wicked, because you really would, it would help you with identifying characters, plot, themes. I'm telling you, it'd be a great practice for you. And you can sing. You're welcome. So, dialogue. This is another part of stories. This is the conversation, that spoken interaction between characters within a story. The whole point of this, and the reason why you want to make sure you're paying attention to this, is because it reveals character information. We might not always be inside of a character's head because of the point of view of the narrator, but their dialogue will reveal information about them. Okay. It also advances the plot. It conveys emotions. It creates tension, conflict. Like, ooh, no, she didn't, girl. Yes, she did. And that's what you're getting from that dialogue. Now, that dialogue can be used to develop relationships, whether it be good, bad, strained, whatever. But you can use the words to help show relationships between characters, like what they're saying to each other, how they're interacting. And then it can also highlight character traits. Maybe you got one that's just super sarcastic and they're saying sarcastic things all along. That's where I'm going to be in trouble, because I don't pick up on sarcasm very well. I am Sheldon Cooper. Sheldon Cooper is I. But anyway, it also can provide insight into the theme. So that's, again, why it's so important to pay attention to what the characters are saying. Because, again, remember, theme is going to be reoccurring. So maybe that character is going to bring it up over and over again. If you watched Wicked, Elphaba, the Wicked Witch, or the witch, she constantly talked about one thing. No spoilers. I won't. I'm sorry. But she constantly talked about one thing predominantly throughout the play. It was actually a book before it was a play, before it was a movie. Okay. Sorry. The literature teacher in me will stop now. But plot. That is another feature. You want to make sure you're paying attention to the sequence of events. So what's happening at the beginning? What's that rising action? Climax, that's the high point of the story. Might be the low point of the story. Remember, it doesn't always have to be a positive. It could be a low point in someone's life. Then the falling action. So like what's happening after that high or low point? And then how does it wrap up? What's the resolution? Okay. So these are all going to be where you're going to see those characters making decisions, where they're encountering obstacles, undergoing transformations. Transformations can be good, transformations can be bad, so keep that in mind. And then how that can lead to the resolution, how that story is wrapping up and concluding. All right. So any questions on those different elements of a story? All right. Now, when you're looking at similarities and differences, and this is something you might see in a question, so there's a couple different ways to approach this. Okay, so I'm going to show you the two. One way is that you can find one work, they might give you one piece to read, and there might be two or more themes within that piece that you've read. Okay, so for example, I know I reference it a lot. I'm so sorry. But To Kill, it's a really good book. You should try it out. To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. That is one book. If you've never heard of it, never read it, that is a book. It's a novel. It's a very famous novel. It's a very good novel. But within that one book, Harper Lee talks about several different themes. She talks about racial injustice, loss of innocence, and moral courage. So that's where in one piece you've got three different themes being presented. Okay. Now, you might also have it where they give you a question and you've got to read two different pieces. Okay, so 2 pieces of work. Well, or multiple pieces of work, whatever. But within those 2 pieces, for example, we'll just go with 2. We'll do 3 right here. Within those 3 pieces of work, they all express the same common theme. So, for example, if you've not ever read it, The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. Oh, poor pony boy. The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen, do not ask me to butcher his name, Chbosky. A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. All 3 of those, and yes, The Perks of Being a Wallflower is a movie, but it was a book first. But all 3 of those novels, all 3 of those works, they are the theme that is predominant throughout all 3 of them is coming of age. So The Outsiders, it shows you them maturing, growing up, how they're coming of age and becoming from leaving youth going into adulthood. Same things with The Perks of Being a Wallflower and A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Leaving that childhood, going into adulthood, and how you're coming of age. Okay, so that's 2 different ways that questions can be approached. Giving you one piece to read and you're finding multiple themes within that one piece, or you got multiple pieces and you're trying to find a common theme between the 2 or between the 3. Okay. Now, a little bit of a breakdown because I'm all about the tips and the tricks and how to help you. So, the breakdown on how to find themes. So, the process that I recommend going through to identify. 1, read the passage carefully. That's the teacher in me. I'm going to tell you, read carefully to understand what its content is saying and the context in which it should be taken in. Number 2, then you want to go through and you want to identify the main ideas or concepts that are being explored. So what's the main idea of this passage? What's the big takeaway? Okay. Look for reoccurring patterns or messages within the passage. Consider how the author's developing these with imagery, symbolism. So is there a lot of white for purity? And the character's thoughts and emotions. Going back to Aesop's fable with the tortoise and the hare. Does everybody remember that? So throughout that story, you've got this pretty much a turtle and a rabbit. They're racing each other, right? And that rabbit is so full of himself. He thinks, oh, yeah, I've got this in the bag. I'm so fast. I'm going to beat this turtle. Well, he did not stay adamant and he lollygagged around. And guess what? He got his tail beat by that little turtle. The whole moral of that story is slow and steady wins the race. The turtle just kept on going, kept a good speed, never gave up, and just kept on going. That turtle messed around, wore himself out, and then at the end, when it was really time to shine, he didn't have enough steam to finish it across the finish line. So, last, you want to analyze the author's intent and the overall message that's being conveyed. So again, what's the whole point of the turtle and the rabbit racing? Slow and steady wins the race. So what's that broad insight? What's my big takeaway? So what moral of the story am I supposed to be taking away from this? Okay. Now, I'm going to ease you into this with a little bit of practice. So I've got a short passage here. Okay. And I've got two questions. And I want you to read these. This is going to give you some practice on those foundational skills that we talked about. I'm going to put 2.5 minutes on my timer since there's a passage and 2 questions. And then in 2.5 minutes, we're going to come back and we're going to check these, okay? All right, ready, set, defy gravity, go. Yes, you sure are. You can put either answers in the chat. All right, I see a couple people still working, so go ahead and get your answers in. All right, so it didn't mark it either. I don't know what's going on with this. But number one was B, a small village in the countryside. And number two, who's the main character of the story? That one is C, Daphne. Even though they talked about Sarah and Daniel, there was no Jack. But Sarah and Daniel, they were supporting characters, not main characters. Daphne's the main character. So B and C. Any questions on those? All right. So now we've got the same passage, so you don't have to reread the whole thing again. But here's one more practice question, okay? Take a look at that one. And then I'm going to put a minute on the timer and then we'll come back. And then I'll unmute myself. Go. All right, so for this one, well, hello. There we go. Not that it highlighted it or anything, but it's C, a magical realm. She stumbled on a hidden path that led to the magical realm. It's right there. Any questions on that one? Pre-nursing at archerreview.com. That's the email you can reach them at. You're welcome. All right, so now we've eased into it. Now we're going to go a little bit more. I've got this short passage here. Now be very careful with the wording, okay? I'm warning you. And I want you to tell me what's the most appropriate theme out of those 4 answer options, okay? I'm going to set 2 minutes on the timer, and then we'll come back and check, okay? Ready? And go. All right, so let's go through and check. Someone asked a great question. I'm going to share this for the group because others might find help with this as well. This one had me second guessing my answer. How do you become more confident in your answer choices? You're not going to like my answer. Practice. The more you practice with them, the more you expose yourself to the different types of readings, the more confident you're going to get in it. And also, trust your gut instinct because a lot of the times you're right the first time. It's just that you go back and you overthink it. I mean, I'm not saying you do in particular. I know that used to be my problem. I would overthink it and then I would psych myself out and then I'd get the answer wrong and I had it right the whole time. Um, oh, the previous one. So that was C, a magical realm. And it's probably the reason why you overthink it is because you're anxious. Do you feel anxious when you're answering these questions? Do you feel stressed? Obviously, I'm guessing you probably do. Um, And that's why you're overthinking it, because you're putting so much pressure on yourself to get the answer right that you're psyching yourself out. I know that's probably not like the most reassuring answer you were looking for, but in the past, oh gosh, how long have I been doing this? 15 years that I've been working with students like this. That's typically why they miss stuff. Again, it's not because they don't know the material, it's because they psych themselves out, or they just don't know how to read. Like, they don't know how to interpret the reading the material. Yep. So, and that's why you just want to keep your tips and tricks in mind, and you want to practice as much as possible, because the more you expose yourself to something, the more you become just more familiar with it, more comfortable with it, and that's going to help you ease that anxiety. That's just my personal belief in that and what I've done with students in the past. I'll be honest with you, because when I was in math class, I used to sit there, and I know this sounds so nerdy, but I wanted to do really well on my math exams. So, in order to do so, I would go home at night. And after I had done all my other homework, I would sit there and I would just do practice equations for an hour. It wasn't homework, it was just extra practice. And it just it's kind of like muscle memory. When you do something a lot, your body just kind of gets that muscle memory. It's the same thing with your brain when you learn how to interpret. But anyways, sorry, I kind of went off on a tangent with my little pep talk. I hope that helped. With this one here, not that it's going to have highlighted it, because it didn't. See, it didn't. Yep, hand and eye coordination. That's right. So with this one, the correct answer was, let me make sure I'm saying this correctly. It was C, the power of courage. Now, you may have got this one wrong, and that's okay, because this one is a very tricky. I'm going back through. See if anybody got it right. Couple people got it right. Couple people they put in B. Triumph over adversity. And that deserves a little bitty pat on the back, because you were kind of on the right track. You just weren't quite there. And then some people put D, resilience. But here's the thing. And why is it not A? A could be one too. Yeah, no, it's not. It couldn't be, but it looks like it could. A, B, and D all look like they could, but actually what those are, they are what we call supporting details. So when you read this passage, we see the very first sentence says, in the face of adversity. Okay, well, that's in B. That's answer option B. Valor prevails. So in the face of adversity, valor prevails. It is the inner strength that pushes us forward when everything seems to be against us. Valor allows us to overcome our fears, embrace challenges, and find success even in the most difficult obstacles. So, what it's talking about is the power of courage. So, what they're doing is that they use the word valor, which is a synonym, means the same thing as courage. If I take that word courage and I put it in the place of valor, in the face of adversity, courage prevails. It is the inner strength that pushes us forward. Courage is the inner strength that pushes us forward when everything seems to be against us. Courage allows us to overcome our fears, embrace our challenges, and find success even in the most difficult obstacles. Perseverance is what you're doing with that courage, with that valor. Okay? Triumph over adversity, that's where courage prevails, is through or in the face of adversity. Resilience is a characteristic of that courage. Okay, so it's a supporting point of the courage. So perseverance, that supports courage. That's where you're illustrating your courage, by persevering. By triumphing over adversity, you're demonstrating courage. So it's an example of courage. Resilience is another example of courage. So they're all supporting examples of C, courage. That's the thing. Courage is what's coming through all the way through the passage. And that's where you're going to get tripped up, because instead of using the word courage, it used the word valor. see how that little trick was done. So A, B, and D are all supporting examples of that courage, of that valor. Oh, you're welcome. So see, now that I've explained how to read that, do you think you could have gotten to the right answer if you didn't? And I'm a big believer in going in and substituting words, kind of like filling in and checking your math equations. All right, we've got another one here. Take a look at this one. See how you do. Okay. I'm going to set the timer for 2 minutes because that seemed to be a good time for everybody. All right, ready, set, and go. All right, looks like everybody was finishing that up, so let's take a look. Friendship is a bond that withstands the test of time. True friends lift us up, offer support, and share life's joys and sorrows. They are a chosen family, always there to lend a helping hand and to provide comfort in times of need. So the common theme, the most appropriate theme is B, the strength of friendship. So, I mean, it says right there, friendship is a bond that withstands the test of time. Some of you, I'm talking to one of you in particular, you changed your mind. You had it right. You overthought it. You went to D. So, friendship, true friends, there's that friendship. They lift you up. They're chosen family. Companionship is not the same thing. Nobody's put A, but I'm just going to explain it. So companionship is not the same thing as friendship. That's two different types of relationships. Loyalty and trust, it doesn't really talk about loyalty and trust in there. And then the value of relationships. Well, it's not talking about all different types of relationships, is it? It's not talking about like boyfriend, girlfriends, marital spouses. Test of time gave it away for me. Yeah. So this one, it was like, I mean, it probably seemed too good to be true because friendship was the very first word of the passage, but I mean, sometimes they will just put it right there in your face like that. And they're trying to trick you because you think it's that easy, so it can't be right. But relationships and companionships, those are two different types. They're not the same as friendships. Okay? Relationships is a broad aspect. That could be friends, family, spouses, romantic partners, whatever. Companionship, that's a limited, it's not friendship, it's just, companions. You see that? Any questions? And again, it didn't highlight it. I'm gonna get this right for next time. So next week, just be prepared to be blown away by my highlighting skills. All right. So any questions on theme? All right. Now, as a side little note, before we move on to 3.3, if you want to test this and you got kids, watch some Disney movies, cartoon movies. Oh man, they are great for trying to test and come up, like they illustrate constantly different themes. Okay. All right, so moving into 3.3, since we are starting to dwindle down on time. 3.3, analyze an argument. So in this section, you want to be able to identify claims that the author is making and counterclaims. You want to be able to evaluate evidence to determine if it is relevant and if it does support an argument that's being made. You want to be able to compare text from different sources and different opinions to determine if it's credible. So is it reliable? Is it, backed up? And then be able to identify and evaluate. I didn't put identify, but you do need to be able to identify primary versus secondary sources. And then last, identify false or misleading statements or information. So there are a couple of steps to evaluating an argument. Number one is identify the main claim. So what's the claim that the author's trying to make with this argument? Okay, what are they claiming? What's their side that they're arguing for or against? Examine the evidence. So what evidence is being presented as supporting information for this claim? Then, number three, you want to consider counter arguments. So what's going to be the opposing side? Because there's always going to be an opposing side to an argument. Then you want to be able to evaluate logical reasoning, not wish-wash, Billy gosh. You want to be able to evaluate logical reasoning, so something that is coherent and reliable. And that leads you into being able to assess their credibility and their expertise. So is that person actually an expert and, able to write on this subject matter? And then evaluate the clarity. So how easily is it understood? Somebody asked a question. About setting. I'm not quite sure what you meant by that question. If you can just retype that and give me a little bit more, I'll be happy to try to answer it. All right. So those are some steps to evaluating an argument. Now, you do need to be able to read a passage and identify the main claim. So in order to do so, you need to know what that means. What is a claim? That is essentially the thesis. Most of you probably have heard the word thesis in your academic careers. So the thesis of the argument. So you're identifying the author's topic first. So what's this passage about? 1 to 2 words that what this passage is about. Okay. And then from there, that's going to help you identify the thesis. What is the main idea, the main claim that's being presented in this passage? So ask yourself, these are some tips. Ask yourself when you're trying to find that main claim or that thesis, what is the point that the author is trying to make? What is the author trying to convince me of? Because with an argument, remember, they're trying to convince you to their side. So what are they trying to convince you to the side of? All right. So we're going to just jump right on in. Okay. I want you to read this passage and I want you to tell me, what do you think the primary claim of this passage is? What is the main argument that the author is trying to make? All right, I'm going to put 2.5 minutes on the timer. Get ready, set, go. All right, let's take a look. So for this one, what is the primary claim presented in the passage? This one would be D. The legalization of marijuana for recreational use benefits society. So it's listed right there. See, I don't know why it's bolding some things and not others. That first sentence, the legalization of marijuana for recreational use should be implemented to benefit society. So that one's D. Any questions? All right. Well, the first sentence usually determine this. No. Near. Oh, no, you're fine. No, you're fine. That's why I try to give a pause there. I know people probably think, oh, she's just stuck in her brain. No, I just try to give a pause for people that type. Um, no. So do not think that the primary claim, the thesis, the main idea is always going to be in that first sentence. That is a great question. Students ask me that a lot. That is a false sense of security. Do not ever think that it's always going to be there. This one just happened to be there. I've seen some where, especially in a multi-paragraph passage, the oh, stutter much. The theme, the main idea, the thesis, they're typically going to be the last sentence of that first paragraph when it's a multi-paragraph passage. But I have seen cases where in a singular paragraph, it'll be 2 or 3 sentences in because they're using introductory details. I've seen in multi-paragraph passages where it's very vague in the introduction paragraph, that first paragraph, so you kind of miss it, but then it's really shining through when they restate it in that last paragraph like they're supposed to. So don't think it's always going to be that first sentence like it was here. That just was a fluke. Good question. Any other questions? All right. So now we've looked at finding the claim, so what they're arguing for or against. So then you need to be able to examine the evidence that's being provided. So when you look for the evidence, or when you read the passage, I'm sorry, when you read the passage, you want to look for the evidence that's being provided to support the claim. So in this passage, in this multi-paragraph passage, what information are they giving you? The evidence. So it needs to be something that can be backed up. You should be able to look and see, is it true or not? But what evidence are they giving you to support whatever that argument is that they're making, that claim? You need to be able to evaluate the quality, not the quantity, but this is quality over quantity. So what's the quality? The relevance of the evidence. So is someone who's got 3 degrees in psychology giving this mental health information, then they would be qualified. Ask yourself, is this based on a credible source? So think about what different types of sources are and if it's credible. Is it up to date? Are you talking about something that's more relevant today, but you're using a source from 50 years ago? Does this source or does the evidence logically support the claim? So, not emotionally, not radically, but logically, does it support it? Now, speaking of those, just to give you a little bit of terminology, because if you're returning, you know I'm big on terminology. Make sure you understand what this means. Primary source. This is going to be that first-hand account, that initial original publication, and it's going to provide evidence, or if you want to call it information, about a specific event, a topic, a time period. These primary sources are typically created by someone who was directly involved in whatever it is you're talking about, or they witnessed whatever it is that you've got this evidence for. So primary sources, they are going to typically provide insight into historical events, phenomena, as you will. So a couple examples of what a primary source is. So remember, that's from the person directly involved. That could be a diary. It could be letters, personal journals, research studies like the original research studies and experiments that were performed, speeches, if someone gives a speech, they were there, interviews, oral histories, official documents like reports, laws, treaties, court records, photographs, recordings. Those are all going to be primary sources because they're based on that initial contact, initial situation, whatever you want to call it. Secondary sources, on the other hand, these are created by individuals who are interpreting or analyzing that primary source. So, one way I kind of keep it straight in my brain is that a primary source is going to be a book, like the actual OG book. And a secondary source would be if somebody, not I, but because I don't want homework, but if somebody was writing a book report on that book. So they're essentially talking about what's going on in that book, but it's not actually the original book itself that you've got in hand. They're referencing it. So the original book would be the primary source. The book review would be the secondary source because it's a review of that initial original source. Okay? Any questions on that? Now, how does this apply to questions? Well, I'm so very glad you asked me. Thanks. I appreciate it. So, I'm just kidding, y'all. It's getting late. I'm trying to like keep the mood up. Um, so when you have these questions, how that's going to be applied is that they're going to give you little clips, little snips, little bits of information. Maybe sometimes it's something fictional, a little passage, but sometimes they're just giving you examples of things. You need to be able to identify what the claim is and then also be able to identify and reference evidence that's being given to back up that claim. So what I want you to do here is I want you to read this little paragraph right here, okay? And I want you, now this one is very tricky. So if you don't get this right, do not beat yourself up because remember, you're just learning this stuff tonight, okay? Nobody expects perfection, and if they do, they need to be told a little what for because nobody's perfect the first time around. So read through this passage and then tell me A, B, C, D. Does the evidence provided in the passage support any of those claims made? Okay. All right. So I'm going to put 2.5 minutes on the timer. Actually, I'm going to put 2 minutes and 45 seconds because this one's a little bit of a doozy. All right. Ready, set, and go. All right. Take a few more seconds and get your answers in. All right, so for this one, it was a tricky one, but this one was C. The passage does not provide sufficient evidence to evaluate the claim. You might have been inclined to put A. Yes, the evidence supports the claim of a new experimental drug curing the rare disease. But you got to look back at the passage. Okay? It has been found to cure a new experimental drug has been found to cure a rare disease with a 100% success rate. Really? 100% success rate? That sounds too good to be true. Well, think about it. Did they tell you? Now, true evidence would tell you the breakdown of it. That 100% success rate, was that 100 people out of 100 people were cured success rate? So, like all 100 people that were given this drug were cured. Or did they give it to one person and that one person was cured? From a mathematical standpoint, if you have 100 people given the drug and all 100 people are cured, that's a 100 out of 100. So you got 100% success. But on the flip side of that, if you only gave that drug to one person and that one person was cured, you have 1 out of 1, which is, guess what? 100% success rate. They did not tell you that, they didn't give you enough breakdown to provide evidence to support the claim. So they did not provide sufficient evidence to evaluate that claim, because I don't know how they got that 100% success rate. What's the makeup of that 100% success? Does that make sense? I see some people got it right though. But A, if you put A, it's probably because you thought that, oh, there's 100%, right? You saw that 100% and you're like, oh, yeah, there's my evidence. Well, but take it one step further and break down, like, think about, is it credible, reliable information? Oh, you're welcome. All right, so we've talked about finding the claim, so what's the argument? But also you need to think about what's the counterclaim to that argument. So that would be the opposing viewpoints, those opposing counter arguments. So if you're going to have a strong claim, a strong argument, you just have to keep in mind that if it's strong, there's also going to be an opposing side. If there's not, then you've got what we call a weak claim. So a strong argument should acknowledge and address the alternate side. So in that passage, if they're making a true argument, somewhere in that passage, they should at least reference and acknowledge the opposing side of the argument. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to have you read this passage, and I want you to find the counterclaim that is presented in the passage. So what's the opposing side that's being presented? All right, so I'm going to put 2 minutes on the timer, and then we'll come back and check. Ready? And go. And I will say this, be very careful of the wording. All right, everybody ready? So now let's take a look at the passage. While some argue that video games lead to an increased aggression in children, numerous studies have shown no conclusive evidence supporting this claim. In fact, research indicates that video games can have positive effects such as improving cognitive skills and problem solving abilities. It is important to consider the full range of evidence before accepting the notion that video games are solely detrimental to children's behavior. So let's take a look at it. The initial claim that was being made is that it says, in fact, research indicates that video games can have positive effects, okay, such as improving cognitive skills and problem solving abilities. So that's the claim itself. It indicates positive effects. The beginning of the passage starts out with the counter argument. While some argue that video games lead to increased aggression in children, and then it tells you the opposite, numerous studies have shown no conclusion evidence supporting that claim. It comes right out and says that claim. But increased aggression. So that would be the counterclaim because the main claim is that it has positive effects. So it can lead to increased aggression in children. That would be the counterclaim. So that would be A, video games lead to increased aggression in children. If you put C, video games have positive effects on cognitive skills and problem solving abilities, what you did was is that you recognized what the claim was, not the counterclaim. And a lot of times, see, the claim itself is right here. That second sentence, a lot of times when writing passages, authors will start off, and I did it here just to trick you. I'm so sorry. Don't take that personally. But what they'll do is that, especially with persuasive argumentative writing like this, they present the counterclaim as what we call an introductory detail to kind of set the stage before giving the actual claim of that, the intended claim of that passage. Does that make sense? So if you pick C, I see why you did. It's because you were recognizing the claim of the passage, not the counterclaim. Any questions? And we just talked about this. See, now you're gonna have me in your head. You're gonna hear my little cornbread chipmunk accent telling you don't overthink it. All right. Let me hold on. I lost one of my screens. Oh, y'all, you just don't even know how many screens I got going on right this second. Yes, don't second guess yourself. You got to build up your confidence. Do some meditation, breathing exercises. Really, though, that has been shown to help. All right. So, evaluating logical reasoning. So, you want to be able to analyze the logical structure of an argument. So, you want to ask yourself a couple things. And this might help you with the overthinking because it's going to give you that support you feel like you need. Is this based on sound reasoning? Is it logical? Are there any logical fallacies present? So in this section, they do like to talk about and have you identify different fallacies. Well, what's a fallacy? I'm glad you asked that question too. Thank you so much. So fallacies can be used to kind of help manipulate, think of propaganda to arguments. And a couple of the common ones that you'll see, especially for the exam, are what we call ad hominem fallacies. So that's where you're attacking a person instead of the actual argument. Okay. So think of this as like tactics that they use to kind of disillusion you from the actual claim. So instead of attacking the argument that's being made, we're attacking a specific person. And that's an ad hominem fallacy. A hasty generalization fallacy is where a conclusion is being drawn based off of some sort of insufficient or limited evidence, kind of like that 100% we were talking about. And it involves making a very broad generalization about a whole group um, on a small sample size or based off of anecdotal evidence. So, based off of a story's evidence. So, remember, a hasty generalization is when you're making a very broad assumption. Circular reasoning. This is also known as, you might see it referenced in some places as begging the question, but this essentially occurs when they are presenting a claim and they are only supporting that claim by just restating that claim. So it's kind of like it says circular reasoning. You're just going around in circles saying the exact same thing, just in a different way. So it's kind of like when your professors tell you in your introduction paragraph to write your thesis, and then in the conclusion paragraph, you restate the thesis. So you pretty much just you say the same thing, but you just rewrite it and put it in different words. That's what circular reasoning is. They're saying the same thing, just using actual different words, but they're not actually backing up what they're saying with evidence. And then last but certainly not least, the fourth one would be appeals to emotion. This one's pretty popular. So this is also called an emotional fallacy, but this is when the arguments are being made based primarily on the emotional manipulation rather than supported evidence. So this is where you're trying to get a strong reaction out of your reader, out of your audience, in order to persuade them to your side of the argument. So make you some study cards. Make sure you know those four terms right there. Ad hominem fallacy, hasty generalization, circular reasoning, and that appeals to emotion. Okay. And remember, when it makes an appeal to an emotion, that's not always like sad, crying emotion. That could be anger, could be sympathy, could be I don't know, I've ran out of emotions this late at night. All right, so what I've done here is I've given you a statement, and there is a specific fallacy that is occurring within this passage. I want you to think from the ones we just talked about, and I want you to identify which fallacy is being committed within this passage. Okay, what are they saying? Okay, all right, so take a minute and a half. I'm only going to do a minute and a half on this one, and then we'll come back and check. Ready? Go. Yeah. Oops, no, I can't. There you go. I'll wait. Oops, my Siri's talking. All right, so ad hominem fallacy, hasty generalization, circular reasoning, appeals to emotions. All right, now read this passage and tell me which one's occurring. All right, take a few more seconds. All right, so let's take a look at this one. So this one's a little tricky because at first glance, it almost looks like this. Oops, I went way too far. Hello. That there's a couple of them that it looks like it could apply to, but let's break it down to see why it doesn't apply to certain ones. So the answer is actually A, ad hominem fallacy. So that's where you're attacking the person, not the actual claim or the actual argument. And the reason why it's an ad hominem fallacy is that we are attacking right from the get-go anyone who disagrees with my proposal. So any person, okay? So instead of attacking one singular, specifically identified person, I'm attacking that general anyone. Okay? So I'm attacking the person who disagrees with my proposal, and I'm calling them names. I'm saying that they don't care about the safety of our children. They are heartless individuals. They stand in the way of common sense gun laws. So I'm calling them names. So I'm attacking that person, and that's the ad hominem fallacy. Now, a hasty generalization is if you're making an assumption about a mass group. Well, any one is singular. I'm not talking about a specific group. I didn't say all, and I don't mean any offense by this, but all blondes. Okay. So I didn't say all blondes who disagree. I'm not making a blanketed statement to a whole large group of people. So that's why it can't be that hasty generalization. With circular reasoning, they didn't really say one thing and then just rephrase it to say the next, because it starts off with anyone who disagrees must not care. We cannot let them. I mean, it's kind of keeping that theme of calling them names and saying they're heartless and stuff, but you know, it's not true circular reasoning in that sense, though, that they're saying, well, strict gun control is about our children. Protecting our children is why we need strict gun control. See how that kind of just circled back around? It didn't say anything new. So it's not quite circular reasoning because it didn't do that full circle to come back around. Now, D, if you put D, I can seriously see why you put D, that appeal to emotions, because it's talking about, you know, anyone who disagrees must not care about the safety of your children. They're trying to pull at your heartstrings right there. They call them heartless individuals. However, predominantly throughout the passage, A, ad hominem fallacy, where you're attacking the individual, is prevalent with what's being said. Okay? Any questions on that? Oh, wow. Well, thank you. Someone shared that they saw a question just like this on the T7 exam that they took last year or this past year. Yep. Well, thanks. I like when people share that insight. All right, so that one's A. Now, if you find that you need a little bit more practice with those, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for tonight. But I have a ton of these that I wrote and put into the Q bank. So go back and practice those. There's a lot of them that, and again, I know this because I just re-looked at them, but I wrote a lot of them so you can practice being able to identify those different types of fallacies. All right, so just to kind of go back and reaffirm, assess credibility and expertise. Make sure that you're keeping that in the back of your mind, like considering the credibility, the expertise of the authors, if there's a source. If they go so far as to give you the author's information or the source's information, like the source citation, pay attention to that, because they don't just give that information willy-nilly. There's a specific reason why they're giving it to you. And what you want to do with that information is you want to ask yourself, do they have necessary knowledge and qualifications on the topic? So if they say, Dr. Bob, well, he's got some sort of medical expertise, because that's how you get that doctorate license or title. Is the author biased or have a conflict of interest? So think about the wording, especially if there's a lot of that propaganda, like the ad hominem, hasty generalization, stuff like that. That's a way of showing bias. Okay. If you're attacking a person, it's because you're showing bias against that person. And then last for this, evaluate clarity. So you want to make sure, and this is where do not psych yourself out if you're not an expert on every single topic matter. No one's going to be. But that's where you can actually use your lack of knowledge of something to help you evaluate if something has clarity. So, is it clear? Because if you don't have an in-depth background on that subject matter, you're you're more inclined to be able to say, "Okay, well that was explained clearly to me because now you understand it." All right? And then so you want to ask yourself, is the argument logically organized? Does it make sense from start to finish? Are they structured? Are they understandable? Or is it vague? Is there any, weak spots in their argument that you could argue? All right. So a little bit more practice for you. Got another one on the fallacy. So read this passage. Tell me after a minute what you think the answer is. Ready? And go. All right, so let's take a look. Yes, I am gonna post the link in the comment section. I mean, in the chat box in just a few minutes once we finish up with 3.4. If you have to log off, you can always email prenursing@archerreview.com and talk to him about getting that link. All right, so for this one, not that it's going to be highlighted, but in this passage, oops, did I go too far? Yeah, that's one we just did. Thomas says we should invest in renewable energy, but he's just an environmentalist. We can't trust his opinion. This is another example of a ad hominem fallacy because we're calling him names and saying, "Oh, he's just an environmentalist." So we're judging poor Thomas based off the fact that he's an environmentalist. Now, it would be close to being a hasty generalization. So if you put B, you were almost getting there, but that one's just that's a little too broad. Hasty generalization is broad about, remember, a group. This one's only talking about Thomas. All right. So now read this one. Take a few seconds. I'm going to put 30 seconds on the timer. Read this one and tell me what factors are important to consider. You've purchased SurePass. How do you obtain the webinars? Um, mm, my mind is drawing a blank right this second. Um, there should be a way to access it off of your dashboard. But if you have problems, I hate this. I don't want to sound like I'm putting you off. I just know that he's better at it than I am. Email pre-nursing at Archer Review, and it's probably going to be Brandon that's answering the email. But he's a whiz at the technology part of it all. So if you don't see it on your dashboard, check with him at that email address. All right, so Which of the following factors is important to consider when evaluating the credibility of a source? So this would be C, the author's qualifications and expertise. We do not want emotional language. We do not want popularity, because even if it's popular, it might not be correct. The length of the source, that does not matter. Nope, it's the qualifications and the expertise. Good. A lot of people did well on that one. Oh, good night. I'm sorry it's going so long. Yeah, I was worried we weren't going to make it, but we're about to wrap up in a little bit. But you have a great night. I hope to see you next week. All right. I can't get my... All right, so let's do this one together. Which of the following actions strengthens an argument? A, addressing the counter arguments. B, relying solely on emotional appeals. C, making sweeping generalizations. Or D, ignoring evidence that contradicts the claim. Yes, you are all correct. It is A, addressing that counter argument. Remember, it's a stronger argument if you acknowledge the elephant in the room and recognize that with a claim, with an argument, there's going to be that counterclaim, that opposing side. Good. All right. Which of the following characteristics weakens an argument? Would it be A, clear and logical organization? B, the use of credible and up-to-date evidence? C, acknowledgement of opposing viewpoints? Or D, bias and subjective language? What do you think? That's right. You are all correct. It is D, bias and subjective language. You want it to be clear and logical. You want it to be up to date and be credible. You want to and acknowledge the opposing viewpoints, as we just said. All right, so if you have it in you to stay on and truck on for just a few minutes, I'm going to try to make this fast. We're going to cover 3.4, okay? If you have to hop off, I completely understand. I'm sorry it's taken so long. We went a little bit more in depth tonight, but you can always check in with pre-nursing if you need the help finding the recording. All right, so with 3.4, analyze and incorporate data from using multiple sources. So, lots and lots of things to do in this section. You want to be able to allocate, so pull data from various materials, evaluate different data sources, determine data relevant to a given claim or argument, analyze if additional material is needed to make a conclusion or an inference, analyze if material would be that if added material would provide, I'm sorry, I can't read, a stronger argument. And then you need to be able to produce data from different formats and create information from different sources in order to make a prediction, inference, or conclusion. So kind of circling back to what we started with tonight. Now, a couple things to keep in mind is terminology. So important terminology to know is informational text. These are textbooks, newspapers, manuals. If they talk about a graphic feature, they're talking about graphics, pictorial images, visuals. Graphic representations, those you want to make sure you look at titles and subheadings that are going to summarize that intricate information. So, make sure to look at the titles and the subheadings. They can be very important when interpreting data. So, a couple of different types of sources that are out there, different ways to display data. There's the pie chart, flow chart, bar charts, graphs, maps, illustrations, pictographs, diagrams. So make sure that you're familiar with each of these going into the exam, because you're going to need to be able to work with, not only identify, but also be able to work with these different types of sources. All right, so when you look at a visual element, whatever it is, there's a couple things to keep in mind. You want to understand that type of graphic. So this is why I said know if it's a pie chart, a flow chart, a bar graph. You want to be able to recognize what type of graphic that you're working with, so that way you're making sure that you're pulling the most important information from it. Then you need to be able to identify different key elements. So once you know what type of graphic you're looking at, then you want to identify specific elements that are important and being represented within that um, graphic or within that data. So this is where you're going to want to look for trends, patterns, any outliers. So, like something way out in left field. And then interpret. So you want to be able to interpret the data. You need to be able to read pie charts, bar charts, flow charts. Make sure you're familiarizing yourself with those, not just in terms of terminology, but just in terms of being able to recognize and identify as well. And then, like I said, kind of going back to what we started the night with, being able to draw conclusions. So, based off the information that's being provided, that's, remember, the only thing you can go based off of, draw your own conclusions, okay, to be able to answer those questions. Now, with deciphering visuals, make sure that you understand. I'm not going to read all this word for word, but make sure you understand the purpose. Why do you have this visual in front of you? What purpose is it serving? I cannot say the second one enough. Pay attention to the scale. I am pretty sure, y'all, that I had a dream about this last night because I was reading through this material yesterday. I'm gonna go and tell you, I think I dreamed about this one because when I took the TEAS way back when, and yes, I know I'm an English professor. Why did I take the TEAS? Well, in a different life, I wanted to do a different career, and I had to take the TEAS exam, and I had PTSD. I shouldn't say that, but I do. I dream about it. I know I did last night because it brought it back up, but this was the big question type when I was coming up. Or when I took this exam years and years ago. Um, it's kind of like my story of I walked in the snow with no shoes to school. But that was the big thing, and things cycle back around, so it might be coming up due for a revisiting and reappearing in questions. But the biggest thing they used to do was pay attention to the scale, because they would sit there and they would put little charts and they would have everything like on a grid map, and they would say, well, how many miles from point A to point B? And you have to sit there and count the little blocks up. And you think, oh, 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, that's 4 miles because you're counting 4 blocks. Well, but if you looked at the bottom in the scale, it tells you that for every block that you're going, that actually serves as 4 miles. So if you go 4 miles in one block and you got 4 blocks, 4 times 4, I told y'all that math's going to come back around. 4 times 4 is 16, so the answer would actually be 16. Because you'd sit there and see A, B, C, D, and you're like, oh, they got 3, 4, 5, 16. You're like, well, 16's way out the ballpark. It's not even close. Well, guess what? They got you. So, that's my little spiel on that. So, look for patterns and trends. So, are you seeing patterns, trends, high or low concentration spikes? Are they bunching in their data points? Check, just like with checking the scale, check the labels, check the legends, make sure everything's present and that you understand what each thing represents. Compare and contrast. So visual representations are often used to compare and contrast different elements. Look for areas, look for things that are significant with coloring, shading, size. That can be a kind of like a beige flag. We won't call it a red flag, it's not a green flag. But maybe it's a beige flag. And then ask yourself, if you're having trouble deciphering a visual representation, do not be afraid to ask questions. This is when you want to go look it up. You want to go see professors, like maybe you need to go see your math professor, or, sign up for our tutoring and come see Brandon. Okay? Because maybe you need some help with interpreting Y and X axis, or maybe you want to do some reading practice. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Now, oh, he got my chart off. I'm so sorry, y'all. I'm going to do better next week. But can you see my chart? It did some sort of like, hold on. Actually, give me 1 second. See if I can do this. I'm going to share a different screen. And you tell me if you see. It should be black right this second, but give me a second. Here we go. All right, do you see my screen now? Okay, this one you can see it better. I'm so sorry, y'all. All right, so go through and I want you to tell me really quickly what's the title of the chart and what is the main message that's being conveyed. Now, one of those is pretty cut and dry. The message, you can just type out a short little blurb. Okay, so take about a minute and write that out for me. Okay, ready? Go. All right, so let's take a look. So the answer was the title is McDonald's locations. That's right here at the top. And the main message is that this is trying to tell you the number of McDonald's across the globe. Oh, sorry, I can't talk. All right. Now, really quickly, what information is being displayed on the X and Y axis, and how do they relate the data being presented? Okay. So what's the X telling me? What's the Y telling me? Yep. X is the number, um, oh, I'm sorry. The X is the countries being assessed, and the Y is the number of locations. So the X is the countries, the Y is the number of locations. And the whole point of this is to provide the information on the number of McDonald's located in each country across the globe. All right. So determining data important purposes. The first step is to make sure you're familiarizing yourself with different formats, and then being able to identify the purpose of those. And then once you identify your author's purpose for this data, you can just then decide what's most relevant to that purpose. All right. If the author's purpose is clarified, you might just have to think about what type of data is being applicable to that purpose. All right, I'm not going to read all this word for word, but ways that you can recognize misleading or prejudiced information. Because sometimes, especially when they're presenting data like this, it's not always science-based. There can be misleading or prejudiced evidence. So make sure you'll see that, like on my previous slide. Check to see, did they give you a source? Okay, you can't go check it during the exam, but you can see if they gave you one. All right. Check the data. Make sure that you don't have a partial bar chart. I feel like I've seen that once in a blue moon on an exam where the chart wasn't even finished out. Again, I'm going to always say it. Check the scale. You check that scale. And then check for what we call cherry picking. So this is where they're only including, maybe they're just showing you like positive results and they don't show you those outliers that are negative. That's called cherry picking. Check for bias. See if, in the description or in the language that's being provided, if there's any bias or, emotional language being used. And then check for the context. So consider, a broader context for data that's being presented. Is it being presented accurately? A couple examples of that misleading or prejudice that I just talked about. Cherry picking, where you're only showing what you want to show that supports your side and just completely ignoring the other. Scaling issues, I said it once, I said it twice, I've said it thrice. So, scaling issues, make sure to check those. And then misleading, labeling. So, is that X and Y axis labeled correctly? Sometimes I've seen where they'll have the X and the Y, and they'll have it labeled X and Y, but they turn it in how they've laid out the image. And then that throws people off because they're thinking, oh, the X is over here, and they forget to look to see that the X and the Y are actually labeled, but it's just been flipped and inverted. All right, and then also visual elements. So check for the size, the color, the shape, the font, the shading, whatever. Is anything look off? And then using bias sources. So you don't want to use bias sources. You don't want one that's completely only in favor of one and not even acknowledging the other side. All right, so problem solving, define the problem, gather the information. So, absorb what you see. Identify key elements. Is it cause, effect, stakeholders? Organize your information. If you get a scrap piece of paper, try to take notes. Analyze information, make a plan, and evaluate the process. All right, so when you're trying to determine if something's important versus irrelevant, ask yourself, does it identify the main argument? Then figure out what's the scope. So is the author focusing on only a specific aspect of that topic, or is it more of a broad overview? Look for supporting evidence, evaluate relevance, consider the source, and analyze any connections that can be made between statements or sources. Now, if you're trying to reinforce that argument and that author's purpose, again, make sure that you can identify the main argument, assess what the current evidence is, consider who the audience is, look to see if there's any research sources, evaluate their evidence, and then incorporate that evidence. So this is more for passages, not, because remember, this section is not just looking at images, but other formats as well. All right, so just a quick kind of ease you into it. Take a look at this image and tell me what branch of the government makes laws. Is it A, executive, B, legislative, and C, Congress, or D, judicial? All right, yes, it would be, hold on, sorry, I lost my mouse. B, legislative. Good. All right, now take a look at this image. What is the likelihood of severe storms occurring on Tuesday in Paris, Texas? Now, this one's not as easy as that previous one. That one was just easing you into it, I told you. Take a look at this one and make your most logical conclusion based off the image and the information it provides. Okay? I'm going to put a minute on the timer just so you have time to read through the answer options. Ready? And go. All right, let's take a look. So this one was D. The likelihood of severe storms cannot be accurately predicted solely based on cloud cover. Additional weather data such as humidity levels and atmospheric pressure are needed to make a more precise forecast. Good. You guys got that one right. Awesome. And that's one that, some people miss sometimes. All right, so we did it really fast. We covered 3.4, but we got it done in a nutshell. There's lots of practice in the Q bank. Give me a second. We've talked about 3.1, predictions, inferences, conclusions. 3.2 with compare contrasting themes, analyzing an argument with 3.3, and 3.4, we talked about different sources and formats. All right, so I've got this up here if you need a reference. It's still in the slides. Here's a quick feedback survey, and if you want to take a look at that, I'm going to get the notes copied over as best I can, and then I'll post them. Give me just one second. I'll mute myself so I'm not clicking all in your ear. Okay, if you're on Zoom, look in the chat. You should see a hyperlink file. And if you're on YouTube or Facebook, you should see one in the comment section. So take a look at that. And I don't have it here, but in the other one, I do have, let's see if I can get back to it. Yep, I do. So if you want to check out, oh wait, hold on. I gotta share the screen again. There we go. Okay, so if you want to check out QBank, webinars, we got you covered. Social media, make sure to check those out. There's usually some good giveaways there sometime. SurePass Pro, here's a little breakdown of that. And then if you're interested in tutoring, you got me up here for English and reading, Shelly for science, or Brandon for math. All right, well, that is all for tonight. Woo, we went a little long, but next week we will be back with English part. Is it part one next week? I think so. I have to check my calendar, but we'll be back Wednesday on my normal night. So check back next week if you want to practice on some English. We won't go so long next week, I promise. Any questions before we call it a night? You're welcome. All right. Well, if you don't have any questions, I'm going to stick around for just another minute or so in case anybody needs some time to get the link. And then I'll call it a night. Thank you guys for joining in. Oh, hello there. I didn't see your name. Welcome. Well, I mean, you've been here, so not welcome, but hello. Um, thank you guys for joining in. You had some great questions. Love the participation. I hope to see you guys back next week. And go watch Wicked. It's really good. All right, y'all have a great night. Is everybody good with the link? I see people logging out. All right. Well, you guys have a good night.